Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The men around her talked in clipped tones, shuffling papers, pointing at maps, trading glances that somehow never landed on her. She sat still, hands folded, eyes steady, her presence quieter than the buzz of the projector overhead. To them she was background, furniture, necessary but forgettable. She didn't fight it, not anymore. The silence was her camouflage. The colonel's voice cut through the room. Target grid confirmed. Intercept window, 2200 hours. We're hunting shadows tonight, so stay sharp. He looked at each of them but her. That used to sting. Years ago, not anymore. Now she preferred it this way. Unnoticed meant unburdened. Forgotten meant free to move. But what none of them knew was that this mission was already hers, long before they planned it. She traced the outlines on the map with her eyes, memorizing valleys, ridges, wind currents that no one else mentioned. They thought in lines and grids. She thought in shadows and echoes. The hills didn't just exist to her, they breathed. They whispered. They carried sound differently in the night. Her fingers twitched slightly under the table. She remembered the smell of her father's jacket, gun oil, leather, rain. He used to tell her stories about men who never came back, and how silence could keep you alive longer than steel. She had been listening even when he thought she was too young to understand. Now, sitting in this room of loud voices and louder egos, she understood perfectly. Someone coughed. Another shifted in his chair. The colonel clicked the remote. A drone photo appeared, grainy, black and white, a cluster of structures in the mountains. Intel suggests high-value transfers here. Movement every 2 days. Tonight's window is clean. We don't miss this one. She leaned forward slightly. Every detail mattered, but her mind wasn't on the grainy roofs. It was on something else, something no one here had noticed yet. A trail of information buried in the data. A signal, one she had traced in silence while others chased noise. But she hadn't told them, not yet. Because if she did, the mission would change. And maybe not everyone in this room would walk out alive. The colonel dismissed the team. Chairs scraped. Boots echoed against the floor. She didn't move until most of them had filed out. The projector buzzed, then clicked off, leaving the room in a dim hush. She rose quietly. No one asked her opinion. No one noticed she hadn't spoken a single word. But in the dark, her every move was already louder than command. Outside, the air was sharp, carrying the bite of an early nightfall. She walked past the barracks toward the motor pool, not hurried, not slow. Her body moved with trained economy, nothing wasted, nothing showy. A mechanic glanced up as she passed but didn't greet her. They rarely did. She wasn't unfriendly, just unreadable. That was by design. She paused near the fence line, where the hum of generators was just enough to mask a whisper. She slipped a small notebook from her pocket, thumbed it open, and studied the sketches. Hand-drawn, layered, cross-checked against Intel files she wasn't supposed to have. Her father's face flickered in her mind again. Not smiling, he rarely smiled. But proud. Proud of the way she listened when others didn't. Proud of the way she could sit in silence until silence gave up its secrets. He was gone now, buried without ceremony, lost in a war that never officially existed. And that was why she was here tonight. The mission wasn't just orders, it wasn't just duty, it was blood debt. She closed the notebook as footsteps approached. It was Ramirez, young, restless, always filling silence with stories. He leaned against the fence, chewing gum too loud. "You don't say much, do you?" She glanced at him but didn't reply. He smirked. "Don't worry, that's probably why you survive longer. Less mouth, less target." She let the corner of her mouth twitch, half a smile maybe, enough for him to feel like he'd gotten something. He looked out toward the hills, his voice dropped a little. "My kid's birthday was yesterday, didn't call, couldn't. How do you tell a 6-year-old you're out here doing this?" His words hung in the air. She didn't answer, but inside something cracked softly. She knew that weight, the kind that presses harder when no one else is around. He laughed bitterly. Anyway, maybe next year. He walked off, shoulders hunched. She watched him go, then turned back to the hills. Somewhere out there, a different story waited, one that no one else was reading. Hours later, the transport rattled through the darkness. Red light washed over the inside. The team checked weapons, adjusted straps, muttered to themselves. She sat still, eyes half closed, feeling the vibration of the engine through the floor. The silence before impact always carried the most weight. It wasn't fear. Not exactly. More like a recognition. That line between the world that exists now and the world that won't exist after. Her rifle rested across her knees. She ran her fingers along the stock almost like a prayer. Each notch meant something. Each scratch told a story. The lieutenant barked over the roar. "We go quiet from here. No mistakes." She opened her eyes, steady, unreadable. No mistakes. But there was something she hadn't told them. Not yet. The landing zone was dirt, uneven, swallowed by darkness. They disembarked quickly, boots sinking into soft ground, rifles ready. The night pressed in heavy, but to her it was alive. Every whisper of wind, every crunch of gravel beneath a step, every pause in the rhythm of an insect. She read it like language. They moved uphill, following the lieutenant's hand signals, breathing shallow, eyes scanning. At the ridge they dropped low. Below them, the structures from the photo, only now they looked different, too still, too quiet. Her heart thudded once hard. She knew this silence, not the natural kind, the staged kind. But she said nothing. Because if she spoke now, the mission would unravel. The lieutenant would argue. The colonel would dismiss. And they'd all walk into a storm blind. So she stayed still, watching, listening, every nerve strung tight. One of the men whispered, "Looks clear." But her gut said otherwise. She remembered her father's voice. If it looks empty, ask yourself why. And in that moment she saw it. A glint, not from the structures but from the hillside opposite, just for a second, just enough. She inhaled slowly, exhaled, then shifted her rifle into position, eyes narrowing through the scope. Her finger rested on the trigger, not pressed, not yet. The team below hadn't seen it. The lieutenant was already signaling them forward. She stayed silent. But in the dark, her silence was about to speak louder than command. Would they trust her if she broke it now? Or would they ignore her like they always did? Her chest tightened. This was the choice. Reveal what she knew and risk everything, or keep it hidden a little longer until she had proof no one could deny. She didn't breathe, didn't blink. The night held still around her. And she realized this wasn't just about the mission anymore. It was about what she was willing to carry alone. What no one else ever would. What if she was wrong? That thought tightened around her chest like wire. One glint, one flicker, one shadow out of place, it could mean everything, or nothing. And if she spoke now, the lieutenant would shut her down. He always did. To him, she was a ghost in the roster, a body with a rifle, not a voice worth hearing. Her finger stayed poised on the trigger. Sweat pricked the back of her neck despite the cool air. The team had already begun their descent into the valley. One by one, their silhouettes disappeared into the folds of darkness. She couldn't let them go blind, not this time. Her lips parted, but the words caught in her throat, tangled with memory. Her father again, not in uniform this time, just a man at a kitchen table, cigarette burning low, voice heavy with something she hadn't understood until years later. Sometimes the truth costs more lives than the lie. You'll know the difference when it matters. Was this that moment, or just her fear pretending to be wisdom? The hillside opposite stayed quiet, but silence had teeth. She exhaled, low and deliberate, then she broke it. "Hold position," she whispered into her calm. Static crackled back, confusion. The lieutenant's voice followed, sharp, irritated. "Say again." "Hold, don't move." Her tone was calm, firm. the kind of tone that didn't invite argument. A pause, then the lieutenant biting, "On what authority?" Her eyes locked through the scope. There it was again, the faintest shift, not metal this time, a shape wrong against the rocks, waiting, watching. "Opposite ridge," she said evenly. "We're being hunted." The silence that followed was colder than the night itself. Ramirez broke it first, his voice low, uncertain. "She's got eyes on something, LT." The lieutenant cursed under his breath, but he didn't wave them forward again. Not yet. She kept watching. Her heartbeat slowed, steadying itself to the rhythm of the scope's crosshairs. And then confirmation. A second figure slid into place beside the first, both trained on the valley, right where her team would have walked in. Her breath tightened. Two confirmed, likely more. The lieutenant finally gave the hand signal. Freeze. The squad flattened against the dirt, every man suddenly very aware of how exposed they were. She whispered again, softer, "It's an ambush." Minutes bled by like hours. The team whispered options: pull back, call support, risk crossing higher ground, but each option carried a shadow of failure. And she sat there silent until the lieutenant finally turned toward her ridge, frustration cutting into desperation. "You got a shot." She swallowed once, then spoke, "Yes." It wasn't bravado, it wasn't pride, just fact. "Then take it." Her finger tightened. The scope filled with the face of the first watcher, half-shielded, almost faceless under night optics. She steadied, listened to the earth beneath her, the air above her, the pause between her own breaths. And she pressed. The crack shattered the night. Echoes rolled down the valley like thunder. The figure collapsed into the rocks, lifeless. The second spun, panicked, exposing just enough. Another breath, another press. Silence again. This time, silence she had made. The lieutenant cursed again, softer, not angry, relieved. She didn't answer, just shifted her scope, scanning. Nothing else moved. The valley held still. But something inside her hadn't. That choice, the decision to speak, to reveal, had cracked open something she'd buried for years. The weight of being ignored, dismissed, unseen. Tonight, her silence had saved them, and yet it hadn't freed her. Because the mission was still unfolding, and she knew what lay ahead was darker than the ridge. They moved carefully now, every step measured. No longer blind, but far from safe. The buildings below loomed closer. Crumbling stone, patched roofs, faint signs of life. But too faint. She whispered again into comms, "It's wrong, still wrong." The lieutenant hissed back, "We don't abort on hunches." Her jaw tightened. He still didn't get it. Her hunches weren't guesses. They were the weight of years spent listening to what others ignored. Ramirez fell in beside her as they crept forward. He whispered, almost guilty, "Glad you spoke up back there. Would have walked us straight into hell." She gave him a glance, nothing more. He smiled faintly. "You ever gonna tell me why you're so quiet all the time?" Her eyes stayed on the valley, because noise dies first. He let out a soft chuckle, but there was no humor in it. At the compound, the team breached cautiously. Doors swung open to empty rooms, dust, cold ash in fire pits, traces of lives long gone. "Cleared," someone muttered. But her chest tightened again. No, not cleared. She moved deeper, scanning the walls, the ground. Her eyes landed on scuff marks near the far doorway. Fresh. Her gut twisted. They weren't gone. They'd moved ahead, luring them deeper. Her father's words again, heavy in her ear like a ghost. "Sometimes you're not hunting, you're bait." She stopped in the doorway, raised a fist. The team froze. "What now?" the lieutenant snapped. Her voice was steel. "We're walking into a box." He started to argue, but the sound cut him off. A faint click, metallic, echoing. Her blood ran cold. "Tripwire." She lunged forward, hand snapping out to catch Ramirez by the vest just as his boot grazed the line. She yanked him back. His eyes went wide. The wire shimmered in the faint light, leading to a charge nestled against the wall. One step more, and half the team would have vanished in fire. The silence afterward was heavier than any explosion. The lieutenant's face was pale, hard. His pride cracked in that moment, if only for a second. He met her eyes, really met them for the first time. But she didn't look back long. She didn't need his recognition. She needed survival. She whispered steady, "They knew we were coming." The words hung in the air like smoke. Which meant something worse. Someone had told them. Back at the ridge, hours earlier, she'd been certain the danger was external. But now, standing in a hollowed compound, the weight shifted. The danger wasn't just out there, it was closer. Inside the circle. Ramirez's voice shook softly in her ear. "If you hadn't pulled me," he stopped himself. Didn't finish the thought, he didn't need to. Her hand still tingled from gripping his vest. She felt the pounding of his heart even now, echoing in her own. And for a fleeting second, she let herself feel it, what it meant to save someone, not just kill. But the thought faded as quickly as it came, because she realized something chilling. This mission wasn't about finding the enemy anymore. It was about finding the betrayal. The lieutenant called for regroup. The team huddled in the dust, voices low, nerves frayed. Plans shifted, arguments sparked. She stayed quiet, listening, watching. Every gesture, every tone, every shadow across a face. Someone here knew more than they admitted. Someone had guided them into the trap. And the silence around her grew louder. Because she was the only one who could hear it. But could she carry that weight alone? Or would speaking it, nomming it, tear the team apart before the mission was done? Her father's voice returned, low, warning. The truth costs, sometimes too much. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the dirt under her palms, the wind against her cheek, the heaviness pressing deeper into her chest. When she opened them, her decision wasn't clear. Not yet. But one thing was. The real war tonight wasn't out there in the hills. It was inside this circle of men who never saw her. And if she chose wrong, she wouldn't just lose the mission. She'd lose them all. Who among them had set the trap? That question pressed on her ribs with every shallow breath as they crouched in the compound's hollow shell. The dust hadn't settled from the near miss. The tripwire still glimmered faintly in the dim glow of a chem light, a reminder of how close they had been to disappearing. She watched their faces as the lieutenant muttered orders, but his words carried no weight anymore. His authority was fraying, thread by thread, and they all knew it. And in the silence between those orders, something heavier spoke. Fear. Ramirez kept stealing glances at her like he wanted to thank her but didn't know how. Another soldier, Mayor, wasn't subtle. His glare was sharp, almost accusing, like saving them had been too convenient. And the lieutenant, his pride hadn't forgiven her. He had listened once, reluctantly, but in his eyes her silence was no longer background, it was threat. She didn't flinch, didn't speak, just listened. The wind dragged through the compound, carrying faint scents of oil and charred wood. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, sharp, then went silent. She remembered nights like this before. Different soil, different war. Her father had told her once, the first sound after silence is never random, it's a signal, learn to hear it. She had learned. The team debated extraction versus pushing deeper. They didn't know yet that the decision was already made for them. Because she saw it, faint tire tracks in the dirt leading east out of the compound. Fresh, too fresh. She lowered herself, ran her glove across the grooves, felt the soft crumble of displaced soil. She smelled fuel that hadn't fully faded. Whoever had been here had just left. The trap wasn't meant to kill them. It was meant to delay them. Her stomach turned. That meant the enemy knew their timeline, knew when they'd arrive. Her hand lingered in the dirt, and for the first time in years she felt her throat ache, not from dust but from anger. Because this was more than betrayal. It was betrayal close enough to breathe the same air. She rose, quiet as always. The lieutenant caught her movement, irritation sharp. What now? She held his stare, said nothing, just tilted her head toward the tracks. He followed her eyes, scowled, then cursed under his breath. The men leaned in, seeing the evidence for themselves. Doubt spread across their faces like cracks in glass. Ramirez whispered, "How the hell did they know we were coming?" No one answered. But in the silence, the truth had already spoken. They moved out again, shadows among shadows, tension gnawing at every step. The valley was behind them now. The trail wound upward into jagged ridges where moonlight barely touched. Her boots slid over loose rock, steady and sure. She could feel the men behind her stealing glances, resentful, grateful, suspicious. She carried all of it on her back like a second rucksack. And somewhere, deeper inside, she carried something heavier still. A photograph, folded, creased, worn smooth at the edges. Her father in uniform, standing beside a woman she hadn't seen in years. Her mother, a woman who had left when silence became too much to bear. That photo wasn't just memory. It was the reminder of what silence costs. At the next halt, they crouched in a rocky hollow, trading water bottles, forcing down rations that tasted of cardboard and grit. Ramirez sat close again. His voice was soft, careful. "You saved me twice now. That doesn't happen by accident." She kept her eyes on the ridge. He pressed, whispering lower, "You see things before they happen, like you're living ahead of us." She almost smiled, almost. But then Mayer spoke up from the other side, sharp, bitter. "Or maybe she's just in on it." The words cut the air like a blade. The team stilled. No one spoke. Even the wind seemed to pause. She turned her head slowly, met Mayer's glare. His hand twitched near his rifle, not on it but close enough. The lieutenant snapped, "Enough." His voice lacked conviction. Mayer didn't back down. Funny how she's always in the right place. Funny how she never says a word until it's life or death. Funny how she knew about the ridge before anyone else. Ramirez bristled. "She saved your ass. Or set us up to look like she saved it." Her jaw clenched, but she didn't speak, didn't defend, because silence once again was her shield. And yet for the first time she wondered, was silence enough anymore? The lieutenant ended it with a growl, ordering Mayer back into formation. But the damage was done. Suspicion had roots now, roots that would grow. They pushed onward. Night stretched long, and with each step the air thinned with altitude. Breaths turned shallow, muscles burned. But the real weight wasn't physical. It was the questions no one dared voice again. Was someone among them feeding information to the enemy? Or was it worse? Was the betrayal higher than all of them, far above the dirt they bled into? Hours later, at another ridge, the world opened into a valley below. Moonlight washed it silver. At its center, a convoy, vehicles parked, men moving between them, outlines barely visible but enough to mark the scale. This was bigger than their orders. Their mission brief had spoken of a small outpost. Not this. Not a force large enough to erase them in minutes. Her pulse pounded. The ambush, the traps, the tracks, it all clicked. They had been sent into a lie. The lieutenant's face was tight, pale. He knew it now too, but pride still warred with fear. "We hit the target, that's the mission." She almost laughed, almost, a soundless exhale of disbelief. This wasn't a mission, it was a burial. Her eyes swept the convoy again, counted, calculated, thought in silence while the men whispered arguments around her. In her mind, her father's voice again. Sometimes, survival is the only victory worth taking. She adjusted her rifle, shifted her gaze to the horizon, and she saw it, a faint flicker, not enemy, friendly. Or what should have been friendly? A beacon, A drone signal, one she recognized from classified files she wasn't supposed to read. It wasn't support, it was surveillance. They weren't here to win, they were here to be watched, measured, tested. Her stomach dropped, because suddenly she understood. They weren't just pawns in someone else's war. They were expendable. The lieutenant barked again, trying to rally them, but his voice was hollow now. Ramirez turned to her, eyes searching. "What do you see?" She hesitated. The truth burned in her throat. If she said it, there'd be no turning back. But if she didn't, they'd walk straight into fire. Her hands tightened on the rifle. Silence had carried her this far. But silence now might kill them all. And in that frozen moment, a memory surfaced. Not her father this time, her mother. The last words she had spoken before leaving. "One day, your silence will matter more than your survival. Choose carefully." Her chest ached, because now she understood what her mother had meant. She turned back to the men. For once she opened her mouth fully. Her voice was steady, clear. "They sent us here to die." The words landed like gunfire. And in that silence afterward, heavier than any shot, every man knew she wasn't guessing. She had seen it, felt it, and the war they thought they were fighting was not the war they were in. What happens to a unit when faith collapses? That question hung in the frozen air after her words, heavier than the mountain around them. They sent us here to die. No one moved. No one breathed loud enough to break the silence that followed. The convoy below glimmered under a sliver of moonlight, too large, too prepared, too deliberate. And suddenly, every man felt the truth of her voice in his bones. It wasn't a guess, it wasn't fear talking, it was fact. The lieutenant was the first to speak. His voice cracked on the edge of denial. He swallowed, tried again. "That's not possible, we've got orders, we've got." But his words withered, because what did orders mean when the ground itself was proof of betrayal? Mayer snapped, bitter, his suspicion twisting now into desperation. "You expect us to believe her. She's been sitting quiet this whole damn time, and now she decides to be prophet." Ramirez's voice cut sharp, louder than it should have been. "She's the only reason we're breathing. You want to ignore that again." The two men squared off, eyes burning, fingers twitching near rifles that weren't pointed at the enemy but at each other. And she stood in the middle of it, silent. For years her silence had been armor. Tonight it was a knife edge, because silence now meant fracture, violence, the kind that kills from inside before the enemy even fires a shot. Her father's words flickered in her mind again. "Command can fail, men can fail, but if you break each other, you've already lost." She drew a breath, deep, controlled, and for the second time that night she spoke. "Enough." The word wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried weight, the kind born from stillness that had seen too much. Mayer froze. Ramirez blinked, startled. Even the lieutenant looked at her differently now, not like a ghost, not like background, but like something they hadn't recognized before, authority. She turned her gaze down the valley, not at them, always outward, always listening. "You feel it, all of you. This isn't the mission we were told. That convoy is 10 times what we were briefed. The tripwire, the ambush, none of it random. They wanted us here, wanted us pinned between them and silence." She paused, let it sink, then added low, steady, "Orders didn't save us tonight, silence did." Her own words cut her inside, because she knew the truth, silence hadn't saved them, breaking it had. The lieutenant exhaled, ragged. He looked older in that moment, his authority, his posture stripped bare. "If you're right, then what the hell do we do?" And there it was, the moment she had never wanted, the spotlight she had lived her life avoiding. They were looking at her now, all of them. Waiting. She had spent years unseen, unheard, comfortable in the shadows, but shadows weren't comfortable anymore. They were crushing. She thought of her father, buried without honor. Her mother, walking away because silence had swallowed the man she loved. She thought of herself, a child who promised she'd never be invisible again, and yet had lived that way anyway. Her chest ached with the weight of all of it. And then she answered, "We survive." They moved higher into the ridge, putting distance between themselves and the convoy. Every step was heavier than the last. Not from gear, not from exhaustion, but from the knowledge pressing down on them. Their own command had abandoned them. The wind howled through the rocks, cold and merciless. Somewhere behind them an engine rumbled faintly. The convoy was moving. They crouched low, forming a huddle in the dark. Plans whispered, splintered, fell apart before they formed. Extraction was hours away, if not impossible. Radio silence still held, the kind that wasn't accidental. She listened, but not to their words, to the gaps between them, the fear in their breaths, the hollow space where trust used to be. Her own thoughts echoed louder than their whispers. Her father one last time. When command leaves you behind, you either die nameless or you write your own orders. She lifted her head. That was the choice now. Ramirez broke the moment first. He sat back against the rock, head tipped upward, eyes searching the stars. His voice was small, cracked. "My kid's gonna grow up thinking I just left, like I never even tried to come back." No one spoke. He pressed his palms against his eyes. "I can't let that be his story." Something inside her tightened. A thread pulled taut, because in his voice she heard herself, the child left behind, the silence that never explained itself. Her throat burned. For once she wanted to tell him that she knew exactly what that absence felt like, that she had lived it, that it carved deeper than any bullet. But the words stayed trapped. Because her silence was more than habit, it was survival, and breaking it meant bleeding in ways she wasn't ready for. Mayer's voice cut back in, sharp, defensive. "So what then? We just follow her now. She's not even supposed to be." "Enough." The lieutenant's tone was stronger this time. For once, directed not at her but for her. Mayer glared but said nothing. The lieutenant turned his eyes on her, steady, tired. "If you've got a plan, now's the time." She didn't speak immediately. She let the silence hold a beat longer, felt it gather weight, turn the night itself into a drum. Then she said, "We don't fight them head on, we move, stay unseen. Make the hills carry us farther than their reach. Every sound they make becomes ours. Every silence they don't notice, we turn into cover." She met each gaze one by one, even Mayer's. "We survive by becoming smaller than their orders, quieter than their command." Ramirez nodded almost fiercely. "Then that's what we do." They moved again, deeper into the jagged mountains. Each man scanning, each man breathing tighter. But for the first time that night, they weren't looking to the lieutenant for signals. They were looking to her. And that realization cut both ways. Because the more they trusted her, the more she knew what it meant. If she failed now, it wouldn't just be her life lost in silence. It would be theirs. Hours bled into dawn. The horizon bled pale blue, soft light creeping across the ridges. Exhaustion gnawed at them, slowing steps, dragging limbs. But still they moved. At the crest of another ridge they paused. Below, the world stretched wide and merciless. And there, just faintly, was the hum of engines again. The convoy hadn't lost them. Her gut clenched. The enemy wasn't chasing. They were hurting. She crouched low, scanning the terrain. She could feel the others waiting. The lieutenant, Ramirez, even Mayer, begrudging, silent. And in that moment, something shifted. She was no longer unseen, no longer background. But it wasn't a spotlight. It was a burden. She exhaled slowly, a whisper almost too quiet to hear. "Stay with me." Her eyes stayed locked on the horizon, but her mind was elsewhere, on her father, on her mother, on the child Ramirez had left behind, on the silence that had carried her this far, and on the truth she could no longer escape. Sometimes silence saves, but sometimes it kills. Dawn is cruel. It doesn't ask if you're ready. It doesn't care if you're bleeding, broken, or begging for one more hour of darkness. Dawn just arrives, merciless, exposing everything that the night was kind enough to hide. And when the first light crawled over the ridge, the men felt it in their bones. Their cover thinned. Their shadows stretched long, fragile. The silence they'd lived in all night began to betray them. She felt it worst of all, because night was her ally. Darkness gave her the space to hear, to move unseen, to slip through cracks where others saw walls. But daylight forced her forward, made her visible. And for someone who had built her life on being invisible, the sun was a spotlight she could not escape. They reached a jagged bluff and dropped to their stomachs. Below them, the valley stretched out like a wound across the earth. Thin trails of dust marked the convoy's path. It hadn't slowed, hadn't scattered. It moved with precision, like it knew exactly where they were headed. The lieutenant swore under his breath. Ramirez pressed his forehead against his rifle, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Mayer muttered curses, half to the enemy, half to her. And she listened. Not to their words, but to the world around them. The wind dragged across stone. Birds wheeled high, unsettled. Far off, too faint for the others, the metallic thrum of engines layered beneath the valley's hum. The convoy wasn't chasing. It was circling, herding. Her chest tightened. They weren't soldiers abandoned in chaos. They were prey driven into a cage. She closed her eyes, inhaled slow, tried to steady the panic clawing at her ribs. That's when she heard it, different. Not the engines, not the wind, a voice. Tinny, distant, carried faint through the mountains. Radio. Her pulse spiked. She shifted, crawling closer to the bluff's edge, tilting her head just so, letting the sound thread itself into her ears. It wasn't English. Harsh consonants, clipped rhythm, enemy chatter. She mouthed the words silently, translating piece by piece. Years of her father's lessons, old training drilled in through nights at the kitchen table, came back like muscle memory. Pushing them east. Orders confirmed. Eliminate before dawn breaks fully. Her stomach dropped. They weren't just being hunted. They were being funneled into an execution ground. She jerked back from the edge. The men were watching her again, waiting, unwilling but unable to ignore the way she tilted her head like she could hear ghosts. Ramirez spoke first, low, urgent. What is it? Her lips parted, the truth pressed hard against her throat, but still hesitation gripped her. Because the moment she told them there would be no going back, no silence to retreat into, only wait. She forced the words out anyway. They know where we're going. They're pushing us east. Orders are to eliminate before daylight. The lieutenant stared at her like she just unzipped the sky. His jaw tightened. He didn't ask how she knew, didn't challenge it. He just believed her, and that was somehow heavier than doubt. Mayer, though, wasn't ready to yield. He spat into the dirt. Convenient. She's got the enemy's playbook in her head now. What else has she been hiding, huh? Maybe she's the reason they know where we are. The words hit like shrapnel. Her gut twisted, but she kept her face still. Silence had always been her shield. Never show pain, never let them see what lands. Ramirez's fist shot out, grabbing Mayer by the collar, dragging him close. You shut your damn mouth. She's the reason we're alive right now. Or she's the reason we're stuck, Mayer hissed back. The two men glared, inches apart, every muscle primed for violence. The lieutenant's voice cracked across them like a whip. Enough. They froze. But the damage lingered. Suspicion had teeth, and once bared it didn't vanish. She turned her face east, forcing herself to think. Options unraveled fast in her head. East meant death. South was a canyon too open. North, cliffs suicidal. West was the only chance, jagged, brutal terrain but less predictable, less likely to be the cage they were meant to walk into. "We go west," she said. Mayer barked a humorless laugh. "We what? That's straight into the rocks. We'll break our ankles before we take 3 miles." "Better broken bones than a bullet in the head," Ramirez snapped. The lieutenant's eyes stayed on her, not challenging, waiting. Her chest tightened again. She hadn't asked for this, never wanted it, and yet every pair of eyes, believing, doubting, desperate, stayed locked on her. She gave the only answer that mattered. "We go west." The climb was agony. Jagged stone tore at their gloves, boots slipped against loose gravel, lungs burned with every dragging breath. Sunlight grew harsher by the minute, baking the rocks, reflecting into their eyes. Ramirez cursed under his breath as he slipped, catching himself at the last second. The lieutenant's hands shook when he reached for water, rationing sips too small to quench thirst. Mayer stumbled more than once, muttering venom the whole way, but even his defiance was dulled by fatigue. And she climbed like a ghost, silent, steady, each movement deliberate. She had no strength to waste on words. Every ounce of focus went into the terrain, into listening. Because if the enemy was guiding them into a cage, then silence was the only way out. By midday, they collapsed into the shadow of a boulder, sweat streaking dirt down their faces, chests heaving. The lieutenant leaned back, eyes shut, whispering something that might have been a prayer. Ramirez unwrapped a ration bar, broke it in half, pressed the larger piece into her hand without asking. She froze, staring at it. For years she had taken nothing from no one. To need was weakness. To accept was exposure. But the look in Ramirez's eyes wasn't pity. It was trust, and that was somehow harder to carry. She took it, ate in silence. The radio voice returned faint, carried on the wind again. She caught only fragments this time. "West Ridge. Adjust pursuit. Cut them off." Her heart stuttered. They were adapting, even here, even in the jagged wild. It hit her then, not just what was happening, but why. The enemy wasn't improvising. They were working from a script. A script someone had handed them. Her breath hitched sharp. A memory slammed back, her father's funeral, the whispers she wasn't supposed to hear. Words like friendly fire, like intel leak. Words that twisted grief into suspicion. Now here in the mountains, the pieces snapped into place. This wasn't just betrayal, it was orchestration. Someone wanted them erased. Her hands trembled. She curled them into fists, forced her breath steady. The men hadn't noticed yet. The lieutenant leaned against the stone, eyes closed. Ramirez chewed slow, shoulders heavy. Mayer muttered curses under his breath. None of them knew the truth pressing against her ribs. That their deaths weren't just the byproduct of bad orders. They were the point. The sun shifted higher, shadows shrank, the rocks offered less and less cover. She pushed herself to her feet, voice steady though her heart thundered. "We keep moving." The lieutenant opened his eyes, exhausted but resolute. Ramirez nodded, dragging himself upright. Even Mayer, though he scowled, rose without argument. And together, under the brutal light of day, they climbed deeper into the rocks. But inside her, silence cracked. Because now she knew. The enemy didn't just know where they were. They knew why. Why did silence suddenly feel heavier than words? The rocks pressed close, heat shimmering off their jagged faces. Each step scraped boots, tore calluses, pulled muscles taut like wires ready to snap. Breath came ragged, shallow, as if the mountains themselves were choking them. But that wasn't what weighed most. It was the way no one spoke anymore. They had carried silence all night like a shield, but now in daylight, silence had teeth. It gnawed, it whispered, it accused. And she felt every bite of it. Ramirez broke first. His voice was hoarse, brittle as dry grass. "How much farther?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. Distance meant nothing when the enemy adjusted with every move. The lieutenant's reply was little more than a rasp, far enough to matter. It wasn't comfort, it wasn't truth, just words to keep legs moving. But Mayer's laugh cut through, short, sharp, venomous. Far enough to die tired, that's all he means. His eyes flicked to her, not quick glances anymore, long, deliberate stares, measuring. She ignored him, kept her gaze on the rocks, her ears open to the air. The faintest hum drifted from the distance, a vibration more than a sound. Engines again. They were not alone. When they reached a narrow cut between boulders, the lieutenant raised a hand. Halt! They dropped into crouches, rifles ready, eyes sweeping. The world seemed to hold its breath. She pressed her palm to the stone, cool. The rock trembled faintly under her touch, resonance, heavy movement somewhere close. She closed her eyes, tilted her head, let the pieces fall into place. Treads, not wheels, heavier, armored. Her pulse climbed. "They're bringing vehicles," she whispered. Mayer snapped his head toward her. "Oh, of course she knows. She always knows. Tell us, did they send you ahead of time with the program, feeding us crumbs until you deliver the final blow?" The words dug like claws. Ramirez spun, fury cracking through exhaustion. "That's enough, Mayer." "No," Mayer's voice was wild now, louder than it should have been. "Think, how does she know their orders? How does she hear what none of us do? You think that's luck? You think that's some miracle gift?" Her throat tightened. The truth clawed, desperate to escape, but fear chained it back. Because once spoken, there would be no undoing. The lieutenant's gaze shifted between them, unreadable, heavy. Then he turned to her. "Why, Sergeant?" It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't defense. It was a question stripped raw. She froze. Words scraped the back of her tongue but wouldn't surface. Because how could she explain? That her father had whispered those languages into her childhood as lullabies, as lessons she never asked for. That the funeral folded him into the ground with secrets no one admitted aloud. That somewhere in the shadows of those secrets, someone in command decided she was more valuable in silence than in speech. How could she explain any of it without sounding like the traitor Mayer already saw? Her lips parted, closed. She stayed silent. Mayer's laugh broke into the stillness, ugly, bitter. "See, she can't answer, because the answer damns her." Ramirez moved before thought caught him. His fist cracked across Mayer's jaw, sending him staggering into the rock. "You don't deserve her answer." Mayer spat blood, eyes burning. "And you're too blind to see you're protecting a snake." The lieutenant's voice snapped over them, sharp as rifle fire. "Both of you, enough." The silence that followed was jagged, splintered. She rose first, brushing grit from her knees. Her voice was low but steady. "They're not chasing us, they're guiding us." Ramirez's face tightened. The lieutenant's jaw flexed. Even Mayer's fury dimmed, suspicion bleeding into fear. She continued, her throat raw, each word dragged from somewhere deep. "They know this terrain too well. They aren't reacting, they're directing. Every move we make, they're already ahead of it. This isn't pursuit, it's orchestration." The lieutenant's eyes darkened. "By who?" Her chest constricted. For a moment she couldn't breathe, because the answer wasn't them, wasn't here in the rocks. It was above, back in the command tents. The same command that had sent her into shadows her whole career, kept her unnamed, unacknowledged. She forced air into her lungs, but the truth stayed locked inside. "Not yet." They moved again, climbing higher, scrambling over stone that cut into knees and palms. Their breaths turned to ragged gasps, each one edged with the taste of blood. When they finally collapsed into a crease of rock, sheltered from view, the lieutenant drew close to her. His face was pale, streaked with sweat and dust. "You know something," he said quietly, "and I don't think it's betrayal, but I need you to speak, Sergeant. I need to know what I'm fighting." Her hands trembled. She clenched them, nails digging into her palms. "I can't," she whispered. "Can't or woe?" The question tore at her. She wanted to scream both. Wanted to scream that speaking would break something fragile inside her, that silence wasn't just survival, it was the last thread tying her to a father buried under lies. But she stayed mute. The lieutenant studied her, and in his eyes she saw not just command but something more dangerous: doubt. They rested in uneasy quiet, each soldier trapped in his own war of exhaustion and suspicion. The sun inched overhead, shadows twisting, shrinking. She tilted her head again, straining past the wind. And there it was. Voices not far now, enemy patrol. She raised a hand, froze them in place, pointed. Mayor tensed, rifle rising, but she gestured him down. "Wait." The voices drew nearer. 3 men, weapons slung, laughing in clipped phrases. Their shadows spilled long before them. Her chest pounded. The others crouched low, fingers tight on triggers. But she shook her head. No shots, not yet. The lieutenant's brow furrowed, but he nodded, trusted her. The patrol passed, feet crunching gravel, voices trailing into distance. She exhaled slow, her body shuddering with the release. Ramirez murmured under his breath, "How the hell do you do that?" She didn't answer. Couldn't. When they moved again, Mayer hung back, eyes cutting toward her with every step. Distrust wasn't just simmering now, it was boiling, ready to spill. And she knew it was only a matter of time. Because the truth she held wasn't just dangerous. It was fatal. By dusk, they reached another ridge. The valley stretched below, bathed in dying light. Smoke coiled faint on the horizon, too distant to name, too near to ignore. The lieutenant lowered himself onto the stone, face hollowed by fatigue. "We'll rest here, 1 hour." Mayer dropped hard, muttering curses. Ramirez leaned back, eyes closing, breath still ragged. She sat apart, knees pulled tight, ears open to the settling dark. The silence pressed in again, thick, accusing. And she knew it wouldn't hold much longer. Because the truth was clawing now, demanding release. Her father's voice whispered in memory, warnings, secrets, words he'd never dared write down. Words that didn't just explain this mission. Words that condemned it. Night fell. Stars broke over the ridge. The men shifted in uneasy sleep, except for the lieutenant who watched her from the shadows, his eyes sharp, waiting. And she sat there, torn in two. Silence or confession? Both would kill. What do you say when silence has protected you longer than words ever could? The stars burned sharp above them, clear and merciless in the mountain sky. Cold bit into their bones, harsher than the night before, as if the rocks themselves wanted to see them broken. The men shifted restlessly in the dark. No fire, no light, just breathing, muffled curses, the grind of fatigue. She hadn't closed her eyes once. Because the truth clawed at her. Because the lieutenant hadn't stopped watching. It was near midnight when he finally spoke. His voice was quiet, low enough not to wake the others. "Sergeant, tell me why." Her throat tightened. She stared at the dirt between her boots. "Why you hear what we can't? Why you knew the convoy's orders? Why you knew to move west?" Her hands trembled. She dug her nails into her palms, a grounding pain. He waited, no anger, no demand, just a silence that refused to let her hide. And then, like something tearing loose inside her, she answered. "My father taught me." The words tasted foreign. The lieutenant leaned closer, brows furrowed. She felt his focus, heavy as stone. "He was intelligence, linguist. He made me learn, nights at the kitchen table, mornings before school. Languages no one around us spoke. He said I'd need them one day, said it was survival." Her voice cracked. She swallowed hard, forcing it steady. "He died when I was 17, officially an accident, but the words at his funeral," her breath faltered. They called it friendly fire, but I heard different. They said leak, compromise. They buried him with blame no one admitted, and after that, command started using me. The lieutenant's face was unreadable. She continued, voice lower. I was never on the roster, never briefed like the others, just inserted, quiet, invisible. They wanted me where I could hear what others couldn't, translate, report, never named, never credited. Her chest heaved, never trusted. The lieutenant's eyes lingered on her, heavy with something she couldn't name. Pity, respect, anger. Finally he said, and now? She looked up at him, the words tearing raw from her throat. Now I think my father was right. This was never survival, it was sacrifice. Pre-planned. We're not here by mistake, we're here to be erased. Silence dropped hard between them. The lieutenant's jaw flexed, a muscle twitching as if fighting words he didn't want to believe. But belief was already there. She saw it. A rustle broke the moment. Ramirez shifted, blinking awake, voice rough with sleep. What's going on? Mayer stirred too, muttering, pushing himself up on his elbows. Her heart kicked hard. She hadn't wanted them to hear, not yet. But it was too late. She says command sent us here to die, Mayer spat, venom returning full force. Ramirez's head snapped toward her. That true? Her mouth went dry. It's not theory anymore. The enemy knows too much, adjusts too fast. This is more than pursuit, it's coordination. Ramirez swore low and sharp. Jesus Christ. Mayer's laugh was hollow, jagged. So you admit it, you're tied into this. No, her voice cut, sharper than she intended. I'm telling you the truth. They buried me under for years. I was a tool, disposable, just like you are now. Mayer sneered. Convenient. The ghost soldier finally speaks, and all she's got is conspiracy. You expect us to believe command signed our death warrants. Her voice broke through him, steady despite the tremor in her chest. I expect you to see what's in front of you. The lieutenant rose then, his shadow stretching against the starlight. His voice carried iron. She's right. Mayer froze, stunned. The lieutenant's gaze swept them all. Orders were off from the start. Exfil route too thin, intel too clean, and now the enemy isn't hunting, they're hurting. That doesn't happen by chance. Someone wants us bled out in these mountains. Ramirez's face twisted with fury, not at her, at the betrayal. Mayer's jaw clenched, disbelief fighting truth, truth winning inch by inch. For the first time, no one spoke against her. And that was somehow worse. Hours crawled. They tried to rest again, but sleep was fractured, haunted. The weight of betrayal pressed heavier than the cold. She lay awake, staring at the stars, replaying her father's voice. Listen, not to the words, but to the silence between them. That's where truth hides. And here in the silence of mountains, truth screamed. At dawn, they moved west again. None of them spoke, not even Mayer, but silence had changed. It wasn't suspicion anymore. It was dread. Every step into the rocks felt like walking deeper into a grave they hadn't dug, but had been chosen for. By midday, their worst fear found them. The ridge narrowed into a choke point. Below, dust plumes rose, armored vehicles moving to cut them off. Behind, faint shadows flickered along the cliffs, enemy patrols. They were boxed. The lieutenant's hand went to his radio, more reflex than hope. Static, no response. He slammed it down. They've killed our comms. Ramirez swore again, fingers tight around his weapon. Mayer's voice cracked through the rising panic. This is it, isn't it? They're closing the trap. Her chest constricted, because he was right. The lieutenant's eyes cut to her, not commanding, not questioning, just searching. She inhaled, slow, steady, letting the wind thread into her ears. Voices, commands, movement. She tilted her head, caught fragments. Close in. Hold position. No survivors. Her eyes opened. Her voice came out steady, colder than she felt. "They mean to finish it here." Eh? Ramirez's breath shook, fury and fear mixing. "So what do we do?" Her throat tightened. For years she had been silent, obedient, invisible. But now silence was no longer survival, it was death. She straightened, the weight of the moment pressing down but not breaking her. "We fight." Eh? The men stared at her. Ramirez's eyes burned with resolve. The lieutenant gave the smallest nod. Even Mayer, though his jaw clenched, didn't argue. The choice was no longer about trust. It was about survival. Eh? They moved fast, digging into rocks, setting sights, rationing ammo like drops of water. Every motion sharp, desperate, quiet. The valley below roared louder now. Engines, boots, shouted orders. The trap was closing. But they weren't going to lie down. Not yet. Eh? She checked her rifle, breath slow, heartbeat steady. The sun glared harsh, baking the rocks. Her father's voice echoed once more. Sometimes silence isn't absence, it's defiance. And for the first time in her life, she understood. Her silence had never been weakness. It had been waiting. Eh? The first enemy cresting the ridge never saw her coming. Why did the silence feel heavier than the firefight had? Why did the absence of sound carry more weight than bullets screaming through steel and dust? She crouched against the half-collapsed wall, her rifle steady but her heart far from it. Around her, the city exhaled its smoke. Ash still floated like the remnants of voices never heard. She could hear the shifting rubble beneath her boots, could taste the metallic sting of blood in the air, but all of it, everything, had gone quiet now. The mission was over. At least that's what command would call it. A success. A box checked. A line item cleared. She knew better. Success wasn't measured in extraction points or targets neutralized. Success was measured in who didn't make it back. And too many faces would be missing at the debriefing. Faces of men who had laughed beside her, doubted her, leaned on her in moments they never admitted out loud. Her throat tightened as she pressed her gloved hand against the cold rubble. She remembered Grant's last words, a smirk hiding the fear in his eyes. "You'll probably outlive us all." She wanted to curse him for being right. She wanted to trade her survival for his, for anyone's. But the dark had chosen her to move unseen, to carry the mission where others fell. And now she bore that weight. The evac rotor blades whispered in the distance, growing louder with each second. Soon she'd have to stand. Soon she'd have to walk back into the light, into the eyes of those who hadn't seen what she had done, what she had endured. To them, she'd be another soldier stepping off the bird. No spotlight, no applause, just a shadow folded back into the ranks. But she remembered. She remembered every breath, every trigger pull, every glance exchanged in silence. She remembered the captain who had doubted her, now gone. The young private who had looked to her for calm, now a name etched into absence. She remembered the enemy commander whose eyes met hers just before she ended it, confusion in his gaze, as though he wondered how someone like her had been the final blade. She stood slowly, legs stiff, rifle heavy but familiar against her shoulder. The rotors kicked up dust and gravel, stinging her skin. A crewman waved her toward the waiting bird, but her eyes lingered on the skyline one last time. A city broken. A mission completed. A silence earned in blood. She climbed aboard. No one asked what she had seen. No one asked what it had cost. Maybe they didn't want to know. Maybe they couldn't carry it if she told them. She sat against the metal wall, helmet resting in her lap, wind tearing through the open door. The others avoided her eyes, or maybe she avoided theirs. It didn't matter. They had their grief, she had hers, and both were heavy in ways words couldn't share. Somewhere far away, command would write their report. Somewhere, someone would praise the operation, speak of precision and professionalism. She knew the truth. Precision was messy. Professionalism bled. And the mission's success had come at the cost of human souls whose names would be recited once and then fade into archives no one read. She closed her eyes, letting the rotor wash carry her back. Not to safety. not to peace. Those things didn't exist anymore, not really. She was being carried forward to another briefing, another mission, another night where her footsteps would echo in the dark unseen. Because that was her place, not in the spotlight, not on posters or memorials, but in the silence, in the space between command and chaos, in the unseen moments where everything turned and no one would ever know why. Her hand tightened around the rifle, a silent vow. She would remember for them, she would carry the weight. She would keep moving in the dark, louder than any command, quieter than any recognition. And in that silence she found her truth. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And so she vanished again into the unseen, leaving only the dust, the silence, and a story no one would ever tell.